Well, good morning. And perhaps a question that we could begin the homily with is how do you measure evil? Is it something which exists? In itself, evil doesn't exist. Why? Well, it's the absence of good. Darkness, does it exist in itself? Well, it's the absence of light. That's how you measure it. So we start speaking here about the devil and possessions and whatnot, sin. It's good for us to keep in mind we're not talking about, okay, a good entity, a good power, God, and then some equal evil entity. No, actually Augustine, when he wrote the Confessions back in the 400s, late 300s, said, that was his mistake. That's Manichaeanism. That was condemned many centuries ago. God is all good. He's the creator of everything that exists, and he creates it good. And as a result of original sin, of course, suffering comes into the world. Suffering is an absence of good that should be there. My eye doesn't work very well. Well, it's an absence of good. That's a physical evil. Evil is an absence of good. When it comes to moral evil, I make a choice that's not in accord with what God tells me through his church is good for me. I can make all the excuses in the world, but it's still an absence of good. I've chosen to do something other than what our Lord would say, what his church would guide us, how the church would guide us. So when it comes to evil, it's actually something that doesn't exist of itself. It can only exist, in a sense, as in a host, like a parasite. It's a parasite. Wherein, the fallen angels, they chose against God. Whenever we sin, that's what we do. So those are evil choices. So when we look at the gospel today, we see, well, our Lord is taken care of. He's exorcising this man and freeing him from the power of the devil. But there are other ways the devil can control us, right? And sometimes people make it way too easy for him. And that's when it comes to serious sin. Well, mortal sin, my soul is dead. Mortals, we all die. My mortal sin, my soul is dead, right? It has to be something serious. I knew it. I freely chose to do it. Those are three conditions to be culpable, to have lost God's life in my soul. That's what we call it mortal. First letter of John, chapter 5. He speaks of some sins are deadly, some are not. So the devil, yeah, he's good to go if we're living our life without God in our souls in mortal sin. He doesn't have to work very hard at that. So how do we have this daily focus and ability to overcome the temptations of the devil? And the church gives us really good guidance here. Our Lord guiding us through the church. First, it's actually taking advantage of the sacrament of penance and confession often. Mother Teresa, John Paul went to confession almost every day. Not only does confession wipe away sins, our Lord gives us strength not to sin the more that we receive that sacrament. And then it's not getting used to the venial sins. So the devil's always on the prowl. He never sleeps, right? So he's always looking for us to cut corners. Lukewarmness is basically getting used to venial sins. Like, well, I lie a little bit here, or I steal a little bit there. Late for Mass, don't really get my prayers done. Well, that's all a preparation for what he's going to, and of course, God's giving us grace to unite with him. But the devil's also trying to set a trap for you and me. Because when you become lukewarm and just get used to venial sins, that's lowering our defenses to the mortal sins. It's like, well, how did I blow off Mass on that Sunday? Or how did I commit that mortal sin? Well, actually, chances are, probably we're cutting corners and getting used to venial sins. Daily prayer life was probably dropping, perhaps use of the sacraments as well. So daily, in our spiritual life, how do we live this out? Well, I mentioned confession regularly, once a month. That's what the church encourages us. Examine our conscience every night. It's like not getting used to just, and not to beat ourselves up either, but it's like, Lord, you're my merciful, loving Father, I know, but yeah, I messed up with these. I'm going to keep trying to work on this. And if there's some particular, fault that we have to continually strive for, okay. In all humility, fine. We keep striving. We never give up. That's what the saints tell us. A saint is somebody who never gives up. Okay? We keep our peace because the devil's always trying to disrupt our peace. Right? And when he tempts us, it's always having this mindset of the saints. In other words, I don't focus on the temptation. It's like, oh, I've got to fight this temptation. Well, I've just made it worse. No, for most temptations, actually, it's when I realize temptation here, I look to our Lord, I look to Our Lady, I let it go. All right? And the devil, yes, he's a fallen angel. His mind's far superior to ours, but the mindset should be, just don't have time. St. John Vianney is great. He gives a good example. The great mystic of the 1800s in France. He called this, the devil used to beat him up at night, okay, and burned his bed. We don't have to worry about that. We're not to that level of sanctity, so don't go home and get worried. But when we look at his life, how did he refer to the devil? He called him Il Grippin, which means the scratcher. Okay, this fallen angel was at the top. Still got his angelic nature, still powerful. What does this priest call him? Scratcher. I got no time. That's the mentality we should have with temptation, so it doesn't disrupt our peace of soul. The venial sins, and even with the mortal sins. Okay, quick to flee, right? But focus on our Lord, Our Lady. Off we go doing something good. Fine, but not focusing on the temptation. That's just going to cause us more discouragement, disruption of our peace. The Eucharist, for sure. How can we expect to stay faithful to our Lord if I'm not receiving Him in Holy Communion and spending time with Him in adoration, coming to Mass regularly? Daily prayer, the Rosary, asking Blessed Mother St. Joseph for their intercession, pondering our Lord's life, the mysteries of the Rosary. Yes. And then each day, sacrifices, little mortifications, acts of love. Today, the bishop asked us to just touch on his Lenten appeal. He's going to ask us to consider committing to next week, because he sees needs in the diocese that maybe we don't. Unwed mother, perhaps someone struggling, Project Rachel, having made a terrible choice about life. Could be, those in need in various ways, seminarians. But we do have some, one seminarian, David Witherow, from our parish. So where does the Bishop Lenten Appeal, how is it applied? And in the flyer, in the bulletin, you can check and see, but maybe just a couple things that notable for us. First of all is the formation of the seminarians. We have about 50 men willing to give of their lives to our Lord for us so we can have the sacraments. Because once Father and I are gone, there's going to be need for other priests for sacraments. And that's what these guys are willing to do. They're in good seminaries. We haven't had that number since back in the early mid-90s. And then it's actually the Gabriel Project, over 200 women in crisis pregnancies were able to be helped last year. And then Project Rachel, as I mentioned. Catholic Charities, adoption agencies. Okay, hopefully we can still keep doing that in our state. And then the various education programs that help the parishes, youth ministry, our college campus ministries that we have in our diocese are tremendous, and helping people to grow in their faith and actually to know and follow the Lord's vocation. Those are a few, but there are many others, so it's good to take a peek at it. And if we're able to help the bishop, he'd ask us to consider making a commitment next week. So may my God bless you through the Immaculate Heart of Mary.